So this is a very interesting topic. The topic of Noahides and Sukkot. There's a lot to talk about. Let's zoom in, okay? And there's one thing that my Rosh Yeshiva taught me was that if you want to know the essence of a holiday, you have to look at what we pray about, and you have to look at the particular sections of Torah and Tanakh that we read on those days, because that's going to bring everything into focus. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is part of the Torah reading that takes place on Sukkot, on the first day of Sukkot, and that I have listed in the first source here. And this is Leviticus chapter 23, verses 33 through 44. And I'll just sort of paraphrase it. This is the commandment of God to Moses, to the Israelites, that on the 15th day of the 7th month, you have Chag HaSukkot, which is translated as the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths. No Jew ever referred to this as the Feast of Tabernacles. I only ever saw that written on the outside of churches. But we call it Chag HaSukkot, okay? The Feast of Booths. It is one of the three pilgrimage festivals, the others being Passover, Pesach, and Shavuot, which is also called the Feast of Weeks, which is another thing I don't think any Jew has ever referred to it by. But you never know what other people have heard. So this is one of the three times of year that all Jewish males of a certain age are supposed to go to Jerusalem, to the temple, to bring offerings and to celebrate in the presence of God. The 15th day of the 7th month, that's the month that we are in right now, is the month of Tishrei. That's the 7th month from the month of Nisan. Okay, there's several different ways of calculating exactly where the year begins. One of them is from Nisan. That's kind of the Jewish start of the year. And then there is the first of Tishrei, which is also known as Rosh Hashanah. And that's considered to be the beginning of the new year for everybody. So the 7th month from Nisan is Tishrei. And on the 15th day, you have this Chag HaSukkot, and it is called a Mikra. It's a Moed. It's a Mikra Kodesh, meaning to say that it's a holiday. And on a holiday, on a Moed, on a Mikra Kodesh, on a Yom Tov, it has the exact same laws as Shabbat, except that we are allowed to be involved with the preparation of food. And we have 7 days of bringing offerings by fire. We're going to be speaking about those offerings because that's very essential to where Noahides have their port of entry into the festival of Sukkot. And there's specific mitzvot that are associated with this Chag. Now, the first thing that is addressed in this Torah portion, which again is read on the first day of the holiday, is the fact that we have to take the 4 species. One is pre-Eitz Hadar, the fruit of an Eitz Hadar. Eitz Hadar is not something that is articulated explicitly as to what it is in the Torah text, in the written Torah text. This is one of our proofs that you have an oral law that accompanies the Torah text, because the pre-Eitz Hadar is interpreted for us by our sages in the Talmud. And an Eitz Hadar, as we've come to know it, I mean, today in modern Hebrew, pre-Eitz Hadar means a citrus fruit. Eitz Hadar could mean that the fruit that the tree tastes like the fruit. So that's one thing that we're supposed to take, and that is the etrog. Kapot tamarim are the lulav branches, the branches of a date palm tree. Anaf eitz avot, which are myrtle branches, hadassim, and arve nachal. These are willow branches. And we have special prayers that we say using these things. They have both simple and very deep mystical meaning, which we don't need to get into right now. That's one of the things that we do on Sukkot. Then there is another thing, which is that, as it says here, B'Sukkot teishvu shivat yamim kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshvu b'Sukkot. You will dwell in Sukkot, in these booths, for 7 days. Every single ezrach b'Yisrael, basically a citizen of the people of Israel, okay, that refers to the Jews, will dwell in Sukkot. And why do they do that? It says, Laman yedu dorotechem, so that your generations will know, ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et b'nei Israel, that I caused the b'nei Israel, the children of Israel, to dwell in Sukkot, in booths, b'hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, when I took them out of the land of Egypt. Okay, and there is a dual meaning to what that is. One could be the simple structure that Jews lived in during the Exodus and during their time in the desert. And the other, it pertains to the Anane HaKavod, the clouds of glory, which were a miraculous phenomenon that was created by God to protect the Jewish people. It had many different properties. It kept them cool in the hot desert, turning into a pillar of fire at night to warm them, to clean their clothes, to cleanse them. It had all sorts of good benefits, what we might call cloud services today. Not exactly the same thing, and it's a bad joke. I'm sorry. But these are very, very specific to the Jewish people. And that's going to be a bit of a mystery for us, because we have to ask the question, when you have holidays that number one, have specific technical mitzvot that are to be performed by Jews, and also commemorate specific historical events in the Jewish life, in the Jewish consciousness, in our history. And the question is, well, what is the relevance? How does this holiday have relevance for B'nai Noach? Okay, so the first thing I want to say about that is that when these days come around, okay, throughout the year, we have specific, I'll call them spiritual physics, that manifest themselves at particular times of the year. These spiritual physics are in effect no matter who you are and no matter who observes them. But the difference between the B'nai Israel and the B'nai Noach on this point is that there are that the B'nai Israel have to respond to the seasons, these spiritual seasons, with particular behavioral changes, which are encapsulated in the mitzvot. That's the requirement of the B'nai Israel, is to respond to the essence of these times through the technicalities of the mitzvot, through the behavioral changes, through the actual physical acts that demonstrate that this is what's going on. That does not mean that the essence of the seasons is not permeating the world. and that there is not a universal message that is there for all of humanity. Our job is to find out exactly what that is. Okay, meaning to say that B'nai Noach are exempt from observing these things on the technical behavioral level. But there are concepts that they too can integrate into their lives, into their thought, that allow them also to flow with the time. So we're going to get into that now. The question is Sukkot really of any relevance to B'nai Noach, to Noahides? And the answer is yes. Let's take a look at some of our sources, and we'll see exactly how that works. Throughout the year, whenever there is some sort of holiday, Shabbat, Chag, or any of the holidays throughout the Jewish calendar, there are additional offerings that are brought in the temple to commemorate those days specifically. Shabbat has its additional offering, and every other special day in the calendar has its own. These offerings are referred to as the Musaf offerings. The word Musaf means, in English, additional. There's something extra that we do in terms of the temple service on that day. So if we look at Numbers chapter 29, starting with verse 12, we'll see the following. On the 15th day of the 7th month, again, that is Chag HaSukkot, that's Sukkot, you shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days shall you observe a festival of the Lord. You shall present a burnt offering, an offering by fire pleasing odor to the Lord. And this is where it begins. On the first day of Sukkot, there are 13 bulls which are brought. There are other aspects to the Musaf offering, but the thing that we need to focus on are the bulls. The first day, we bring 13. The second day, we bring 12. The third day, 11. The fourth day, 10. The fifth day, 9. The sixth day, 8. And the seventh day, 7. Let's do the math. The first day, we bring 13. And then we bring 12. So now we're at 25. And then we bring 11. So we're at 36. And then we bring 10. We're at 46. And then we bring 9, 55, 8, 63. And then finally 7 brings us to the number 70. That's a very significant number. Why is 70 a significant number? There's several reasons why 70 is a significant number. It says in the Tehillim, Yimei Shnotenu Shiv'im Shana, that the days of our lives are 70 years. Does that mean that every human being only lives 70 years? No. But the idea here is that the number 70 represents a totality of human life. Okay. There's another thing that has 70. The Torah refers to the nations of the world as being 70 nations. When the B'nai Israel are commanded to build a tower, basically of rocks, and to write on it the Torah, right at the entrance to the land of Israel, on the other side of the Jordan River, they are supposed to write on it B'shiv'im lashon, in 70 languages. And it's also supposed to be, how do we know it's 70 languages? Because the verse says be'er hetev, that the thing has to be well explained. How is it well explained? By writing the entire Torah in all 70 languages on this gigantic pillar. so that everybody can know exactly how to conduct themselves when they enter the land of Israel. And we've got all of our laws written right there. Okay. We know that these 70 bulls, the Shiv'im Parim of Chag HaSukkot, represent the 70 nations of the world. Meaning to say that, you think, okay, this is the temple of the Jews in Jerusalem. They're probably going to be doing something for themselves. What do the rest of us have to do with that? But the answer is that what part of what is being done in the Beit HaMikdash is a tikkun, is a rectification for the entire world. The whole world essentially is being processed in the blessing of Sukkot. And we see this hinted at also in the part of the service that deals with the 4 species, the lulav and the etrog, etc., that during the prayers there are na'anuim. There are specific movements that are supposed to be performed, and essentially you point this lulav in all directions, almost as if you're sending out the tikkun to the entire world. Wherever anybody is, we're drawing down through this particular act specific spiritual sustenance for the world, for the entire world. And finally, on the 7th day of Sukkot, which is Hoshana Rabbah, which is a whole different world, there's a custom to take the willow branches and to strike the ground with them. And what we symbolize by that is that we are implanting this blessing in the earth. We're impregnating the earth with this spiritual influx so that there could be a certain abundance for the entire world. Okay. So the Shivim Parim are there to benefit everyone. There are many different ways to understand the Shivim Parim. Okay. Just pulling up some extra notes here. Yeah, so again, we have this offering of 70 bulls. And the number it diminishes each day. That's a very interesting feature. Why does the number go down? If we're drawing down more and more blessing this way for the whole world, why is it diminishing every day? Rashi connects this interesting pattern to something that sounds negative first, which is the eventual extinction of the 70 nations of the world. What is that all about? I mean, if we're supposed to be rectifying the world, why do we want the 70 nations of the world to be extinguished? Except that if you have taken a look at the liturgy that we read on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, at some point in time, the entire Earth's population will be Shechem Echad, will be one society that serves only Hashem. So what we're looking at when we say the extinction of the nations, we are looking at a diminishing of the physical aspect of the world being replaced by a certain spirituality that binds us all together in the service of Hashem. That's Rashi's explanation. We have a contrasting explanation that came from Rav Shlomo Ephraim Lunchitz, who quotes a passage in the Talmudic Masechet Shabbat. This is page 152a, for those of you who want to go searching. He contrasts the wisdom acquired by scholars, particularly Torah scholars, with the increasing foolishness of Amei Haaretz, ignorant people, as they age. Some people become sharper and sharper, wiser and wiser, and some people become more and more ridiculous as they age. That's the difference that Torah can make. That's the difference that Dat Elokim can make. So what Shlomo Ephraim Lunchitz provides is an insight that suggesting that the 70 bulls represent the physical component of humanity. The number 70, as we pointed out, represents the average human lifespan, with the diminishing sacrifices signifying the gradual decline of the physical body over time. But if you want to do things right, if you want to age properly, you're going to deepen your wisdom and you're going to deepen your understanding. And that's going to bring you to what we call in the Torah, Seva Tova. This is how Abraham is described. He essentially to a level of satisfaction and fulfillment. Now, where do we see? One other point I wanted to mention on this is a word from Rabbi Nachman, who says that it's forbidden to be old. That's a very big challenge, isn't it? It's like, what, you're not allowed to be old? It's not a problem of aging. That's going to happen to everybody, except me. But you have to be new. You have to be constantly renewing yourself. Every morning, it says, Chadashim labakarim rabba emunatecha. Your faith is renewed in the morning. We're fresh in the morning. We have to have this kind of way of recycling ourselves. And that's, again, with, leading the spiritual life, that is something that is possible. Okay. Now, let's put our thinking caps on for a second. There's a mitzvah you might be familiar with, where there's actually a discussion between two sages of the Mishnah as to what order things go in. Do you start with 1 and go to 8? Or do you start with 8 and go down to 1? Now, I see some people nodding their heads. So they know that we're talking about the mitzvot of Nerot Hanukkah, the candles that we light on Hanukkah. This is what Shlomo Ephraim Lunchitz contrasts the decrease in the 70 bulls. Hanukkah candles is associated with the intellectual and spiritual aspect of human existence. And because we go according to the opinion of Hillel, we start with 1 and we continue to 8. The increasing lights of Hanukkah represent the growth of the intellect and the growth of spirituality with age, particularly when that's dedicated to the Torah and to true wisdom. And this interpretation really underscores the eternal nature of the spiritual self and its potential for continual development. Now, you have to understand that the way Beit Shammai looks at the candles going down from 8 to 1, it's essentially the same thing. It just is being practiced in a different way. So we see something similar in the 70 bulls. So where the 70 bulls are let's say an increasing de-emphasis on the physical, the Hanukkah candles bring us back to an increasing emphasis on the spiritual. And because we live in a physical world, and we're constantly surrounded by and beset by all sorts of challenges of physicality, this serves to balance everything out. Okay. So that's already part of the universal message that Sukkot holds for all of humanity. It invites individuals from diverse backgrounds to reflect on the transient nature of the physical world and the eternal potential of the human spirit. So whether you're a member of the B'nai Israel or the B'nai Noach, the wisdom, the chachma that's embedded in Sukkot encourages us all to embrace our spiritual and intellectual growth as we navigate the ever-changing landscape of physical existence. So, and when we do that, we can find the common ground and shared values that unite us and on our journey towards a greater connection with God. That's an interesting and very important aspect of Sukkot. That is a port of entry also for the B'nai Noach, for the rest of humanity. Okay, now we've seen the particularistic aspects, the mitzvah aspects, the technical aspects of Sukkot, which is specific to the Jews. And now we are starting to see the universal aspects of Sukkot, starting with our description of the 70 bulls that are offered during that period of time. Now let's take a look at something else. As you might know, when we have Torah readings, there is another reading that is taken from the prophets, which is called Haftarah. Haftarah is an institution that came about because many times throughout Jewish history, public Torah readings were forbidden by local authorities. And so the rabbis constructed things in such a way that we would select passages from the prophets that contain similar messages to the Torah portions that should have been read. And since public Torah readings have essentially been re-permitted in almost every circumstance, we also retain the Haftarot. We also retain the readings from prophets after the Torah readings. So Sukkot has several days and several Haftarot. On the first day, there is a section of the prophet Zechariah. This is chapter 14. I brought the whole section. I'm going to summarize and I'm going to focus in on the part that we need to be looking at. Basically, it says, Hine Yom Ba L'Hashem, there's a day that's coming for God, where all the nations will be gathered to Jerusalem for war. According to tradition, this day is Sukkot. Okay. This war is known as the War of Gog and Magog, which refers to, there are different ways to understand that, but they are known in Ezekiel as the princes of Meshech and Tubal, which are descendants of Japheth, which is one of the sons of Noah. Where basically all the nations come to Jerusalem for war, the city is captured, the houses are plundered, the women are violated, parts of the city go into exile, but the rest are not uprooted. And then God comes and he does battle with whoever came to Jerusalem to do battle against Israel and splits the city that nobody can approach at that point in time. And essentially, God wins. Fresh water flows from Jerusalem to the east and to the west. And it says, V'haya Hashem l'melech ha'kol ha'aretz. This is for anybody who prays out of a siddur on a daily basis is a familiar phrase. V'haya Hashem l'melech ha'kol ha'aretz. At that point, God will be king over the entire world. B'yom on that day, Yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. The Lord will be one, and his name will be one. Okay. We say that several times in prayer. That's a day that's coming. What's interesting is that if we zoom ahead, we have two verses that say the following: all who survive of all those nations that came up against Jerusalem shall make a pilgrimage year by year to bow low to the King, Lord of hosts, and to observe Chag HaSukkot. There will be an observance of Sukkot by the people who survive from the nations. And then any of the earth's communities that does not make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem to bow low to the King, Lord of hosts, shall receive no rain. I mean, you say this is going to be a requirement of every human being to come to Jerusalem on Chag HaSukkot to be Oved Hashem, to worship God. Why Jerusalem? Jerusalem, obviously, is the place of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple. Okay, so now we see that Sukkot as an observed holiday, not just as a theory, but as an observed holiday at some point in time is going to be a requirement of all of humanity. Now, there's an interesting fact that in Israel, the festivals are one day long, meaning to say that the celebration of the festivals that is more like Shabbat, where there are actually restrictions on our activities, and we are only supposed to be observing the holiday, and it has no difference from Shabbat except for the dispensation to do things that for the sake of the preparation of food. That's only one day at the beginning of Sukkot. The rest of the 7-day period is called Chol HaMoed, where, with some exceptions, it's basically like a regular day, although there are still festival observances, but regular activities are permitted. However, outside of Israel, Jews observe a second day of Yom Tov. There are reasons for that. We don't need to get into it now. There's a Haftarah reading that takes place on the second day of Sukkot if you live outside of Israel, which is from 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 2 through 9. I have actually cited verses 41 through 43 because they're part of the same passage and they're relevant to what we're talking about here. Basically, this commemorates the building of the Beit HaMikdash by King Solomon, and includes a very beautiful prayer that he says in order to commemorate it. And there are 3 verses 41 through 43, where he says the following: or if a foreigner, right, the word in Hebrew is Nochri, which refers to a non-Jew. If a foreigner who is not of your people, Israel, comes from a distant land for the sake of your name, for they shall hear about your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm when he comes to pray towards this house, here in your heavenly abode, and grant all that the foreigner asks you for. King Solomon is saying, listen to the prayer of anyone who prays in this direction for the sake of your name. Thus all the peoples of the earth will know your name and revere you, as does your people Israel. And they will recognize that your name is attached to this house that I have built. Okay. So now we've sort of changed subjects, haven't we? We've stopped talking about Sukkot, and now we're just talking about the Beit HaMikdash. Or are we? Meaning, is there any connection between the Beit HaMikdash and the Sukkah booth that Jews dwell in during the 7 days of Sukkot? So in source number 5, which is Amos chapter 9, verse 11, see something very interesting. This is a prophecy about what happens after the long exile of the Jewish people. By Yom Hahu, on that day, which is essentially the time period where God is going to gather the Jews in to the land, and begin fulfilling all of the prophecies. Bayamahu, on that day, Akim et Sukkot David Hanofelet. I will set up again the fallen Sukkah of David, of King David. V'gadarti et pritzehen. I'll mend its breaches. The Har Sotav Akim. I will set up its ruins. Uvinitiha kime olam, and I will build it firm as in days of old. So it is a restoration of not only the Beit HaMikdash, but also Malchut Beit David, the kingship of the descendants of King David. This is referring to the Mashiach, the Messiah. But this whole thing is referred to as Sukkot David. It's referring to that as the sukkah of King David. So we see that there is a connection between the sukkah itself and the Beit HaMikdash. And so when, as King Solomon is beseeching God to listen to the voice of the Ben Noach, praise in the direction of that Beit HaMikdash, when they come to the land of Israel from a distant land, you should listen and grant what he asks for. Paving the way for a universal worship of God. Now, we have something else that's interesting. Actually, also referencing what was written in Zechariah. Generally, the order of the prophets is that we read the book of Ezekiel before we get to Zechariah. But both of these sections, this is from Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 18 through chapter 39, verse 16. This is a haftarah that is read on the Shabbat of Chol HaMoed, the Sabbath that falls at some point during that 7-day period. And it says, V'haya bayom ahu bayom bo Gog al Admat Yisrael. Now this is referring to the exact same war on Jerusalem that's mentioned in the prophet Zechariah. And here, the enemy is identified positively as Gog. And when he comes, God's anger will flare up. There'll be a terrible earthquake. Every creature will quake before Hashem. Mountains are overthrown, cliffs topple, every wall crumbles to the ground. Punishes Gog, basically completely defeats Gog. And through this, everybody comes to recognize God. So God tells Ezekiel to prophesy against Gog and said that I'm going to deal with you. God's going to deal with Gog. And he refers to Gog as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. We spoke about that before. I'll turn you around, I'll drive you on, take you for the far north and lead you toward the mountains of Israel, and then he's going to completely destroy them. And for 7 months, the inhabitants of the cities of Israel will have to bury all the dead of Gog. And this way, the land, because there's all these dead bodies here, it's not a nice sight. So there will be a search for the bodies of the remainder of Gog. They will be buried. At this point, the land will be purified this way. Now it says also, we know that Bayomahu, this is to take place on Sukkot. That's why we read this Haftarah on Sukkot. This is what is this thing anyway? We have to understand this. Who is Gog? What's the big deal over here? Gog and Magog are figures that hold a central place in what we might call the eschatological beliefs in Torah. They represent the ultimate adversaries against whom God wages this very decisive and apocalyptic war. What is the apocalypse? This is the apocalypse. It is the apocalyptic war at the beginning of the Messianic age. And essentially, this is like the last cosmic struggle between good and evil. And it marks the period, basically a transition period into eternal peace and divine redemption. After this point in time, we're not going to be reading about anybody invading anybody or killing anybody. This is the beginning of that period of time when the wolf lies down with the lamb. Has it happened yet? Obviously not. Just open up the newspaper. But this will happen. And it begins on Sukkot. This is, I think, why we pray, Ufros aleinu Sukkot, Shalom aleinu. And very much why I think is one of the deeper meanings of the reasons why we named our group Sukkot Shalom, because this is what we're waiting for. In any case, again, these are the descendants of Japheth, and it's specifically Gog and Magog that are identified here, right? We saw in Zechariah that it was like a multitude of nations, but in Ezekiel, we narrow it down to Gog and Magog. What's the difference between Gog and Magog? One might represent a single personality, whereas the other one represents the nation, or the people who, let's say, follow the philosophy of Gog. But once this cataclysmic event is over, the nation shall know that I, the Lord, am holy in Israel. This will bring about a universal recognition of God. And it's also a heralding of the restoration of the land of Israel to the descendants of Yaakov, of Jacob, including the ingathering of the Jewish exiles to the land of Israel. And this is the beginning of a time when God's presence is always manifest and is not hidden, not from the Jewish people and not from the rest of the world. Okay. But the important thing, I think, for all of us is that this is the ultimate triumph of good over evil, which is something that we're all waiting for. Right? So what we're seeing here is that Sukkot is not just about a harvest festival, and it's not only a celebration of historical events related to the Jewish people from before, but it's a symbol of the ultimate redemption and victory over forces that oppose divine righteousness. In other words, we know that ultimately the government that must establish itself over the world is Malchut Beit David, is the kingship of the Messiah, who is the descendant of King David. Right? The Sukkot David, the restoration of the Sukkot David. So now we have to understand why did we drill down when it came to identifying an enemy that invades the land of Israel, that invades Jerusalem? Why did we narrow this down to Gog and Magog? Listen very carefully. The word Gog is made of the exact same double letter root, Gimel, as the word Gog. The word Gog means roof. So who cares? Why is it why is that important that Gog is related to the word roof? And the answer is because why is a sukkah called a sukkah? What is a sukkah? A sukkah is a temporary dwelling place. But what makes it a temporary dwelling place? Is it what the walls are made out of? There's a discussion about that in the Gemara as to whether or not you're allowed to build strong walls and supports for a sukkah. If turns out that we hold that you can build the walls of a sukkah out of anything. You can take an elephant and make that one of the walls as long as he agrees to stay in place. You can make it out of stones. You can make it out of metal. You could take a corrugated metal shipping container and make a sukkah out of it. In terms of the walls, what makes it temporary is the roof. The roof material in a sukkah is called schach. In fact, the reason why it is called a sukkah is because it has schach. This is a roof made of natural material, which has to be arranged in such a way that those who dwell in the sukkah are exposed to the elements. And what this is there for is a total reliance on and total faith in God. The walls can be of any material, but the roof must be porous and it must be temporary. Let's contrast this with life under a roof. When you have a solid roof, an impenetrable roof, it not only represents a disconnection from God, but a reliance on and a faith in one's own works. It's a type of self-reliance. And that is a philosophy in life, which is completely diametrically opposed to what is represented by the schach, what is represented by the temporary roof of the sukkah, what is probably the most important aspect of Sukkot, is this leaving the home and dwelling in a place that's enclosed all around but open to God. There's something very similar to this that we read in Deuteronomy, that the land of Israel is not like other places on earth, and it's contrasted with the land of Egypt, which is like Kegan Hayerek, like a green garden. The Nile River swells up and irrigates Egypt on a regular basis. It's as if the river is on a timer. And because it happens automatically, it doesn't inspire the inhabitants of that area to any faith, to any sense of dependence on God. You've probably all heard this joke. Person is late for a meeting and he's in his car and he comes to the company parking lot. And he's thinking, oh God, please, I need a parking space. I'm 5 minutes late and the boss is going to scream at me and I have to make a presentation. Please, God, help me find a parking space. Then he sees an open parking space. He goes, never mind, I found one. Right. Like when things happen, when we lose our perception of just how dependent we are on God for absolutely every single thing. And what I think has happened in the world is, as we have made scientific and technological advancements, we perceive ourselves as less and less dependent on God, as more self-sufficient, as we don't have a sense of human vulnerability or frailty anymore. We feel like we are basically impervious to everything. And that's a kind of a disconnection from God. In contrast to the description in the Torah about the land of Egypt, it says about the land of Israel is min hashamayim tishte. They're going to get their water from a river that swells at regular intervals. You're going to drink water from heaven. Your eyes are going to have to be cast upward in hope that God sends you water. Is that worse? It's better, because now you have a close relationship with God. Now you realize you have to pray to him. So the roof, Gog and Umagog, are the roof people. These are the people who are disconnected. These are the people who think they are impervious. These are the people who think they are invulnerable. God overpowers them. God defeats this mentality. So the idea of the Sukkot teaching us to rely ultimately on God and to strengthen our faith is every day a little bit more. This is truly the universal message that B'nai Noach can take from Sukkot. And this is the power, this is the spiritual influx that's coming into the world at this time. And it's something that we can tune into. Now, how do we do that? How do we put that into practical, there's many different ways that you could do it. You could be creative about it. First of all, to pray. And second of all, it might be good to choose somebody that you like from the group and to go over these sources together and to talk about what that means to rely on God and to try to jog each other's memory about just all the good things and all the gifts that we have from it, to bring those things to mind. There's the possibility of buying yourself a nice journal and a good pen and to write down every single day something that you're grateful for. Simple. Write down 3 things a day. They don't have to be anything grand. It could be the fact that you have use of all 5 of your senses, or that you saw a beautiful sunset that day. But to be able to spend time meditating upon, your close connection with God is really what this is all about. I can tell you that is the effect of laying down to sleep out there in the sukkah and seeing the moonlight through the schach and hearing the sounds of other people singing in their sukkot, is that, I have my privacy in here, but there's something that's over me. We always hope it doesn't rain during that period of time. That's always an interesting moment. But, because then everybody has to go scrambling out of their sukkah. I was once in a sukkah in Far Rockaway, New York. And it was the first night. We were guests in the home of a nice family there. And it was pouring. It was also freezing. And the whole family waited expectantly until midnight to start the meal, because the thought of not being able to eat that first meal in the sukkah was just unthinkable as far as they were concerned. So eventually the rain let up, took the towels out, dried off the chairs and the tables, and set. And we had a nice late meal in there, under the stars and the clouds. But when you're there, like, wow, this is it. Going to just read you a passage from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, which is a commentary on Numbers chapter 29, verse 13. It says, "Indeed, the whole content of the world history of man is capsulized by this contrast. One erroneous notion leads mankind astray. Just as people have the power to put up dofanot, those are the walls of the sukkah, strongly built artificial walls, to enclose their own sphere and safeguard it against their fellow earthly creatures, so they imagine that they should secure themselves against heaven, against God, and the effects of his power to direct matters. They think that they should take their fate into their own hands and protect themselves by their own power, and thus crown the building of human greatness with a gabled roof, rendering them independent of God. This is the struggle of the Gog against the Sukkah. In the roof delusion of human greatness, man will find no rest, whereas the truth of the Sukkah teaches man to cheerfully rely on God's protection. World history begins with the building of the tower, that's the Tower of Babel, and ends with the building of the Sukkah, that's the Sukkot David, Anofelet. The builders of the tower worshipped human power and sought to conquer heaven. The builders of the Sukkah will render homage to God and rejoice in their lives on earth. Isn't that beautiful? But this underscores what we need to be doing on Sukkot. We need to be making that transition from a Gog mentality to a Sukkah mentality. So I bless us all to be able to absorb the true message of Sukkot and to make that transition to a Sukkah mentality where we realize our dependence on God and just how wonderful that is.